This is Revolution Podcast. How was everybody's holiday? I am recording this actually before Christmas, but I'd like to know, how was your holiday season? What are you celebrating? How was it? Even if you don't necessarily celebrate Christmas, what'd you do? Hopefully you had some time off. Did you hang out with the fam? Let me know. This show was a fun departure from what we usually do. We set it up totally different. This is a show about a piece I wrote. Wherever you are listening to the show, there's links in the description to the piece I wrote about the online left and the term grifter. Who is a grifter? It is becoming a colloquialism, in my opinion, for someone that has possibly changed their stance on something, sometimes someone that's gotten popular. What's really interesting to me is I think people see this online podcasting world as like a series of rap clicks, bunch of Wu-Tangs. Like if I'm friends with Jimmy Dore, then I have to then endorse everything Jimmy Dore says, which, you know, first of all, I don't know the man. I've never met him, and I'll be completely honest. I'm not the biggest fan of the show, but whatever. I do mention him in the piece. We get into it a little bit on the show, but definitely I get into it more in the piece. And it's not meant to throw any dirt. It's just kind of meant to show a difference. Because the word grift means you're a con man. I know it might sound cool to say, like swagger, like you guys destroyed the word swagger. It used to mean something, not your style of dress or the way you carry yourself. And grift to me no longer means con man. But when you throw that term around and you are, unlike swagger where you've kind of made it mean its own thing, you're still trying to put the same meaning on the term grift. These are con men. And it's often thrown at people on the left, and I think that's just funny, first of all, because there's no money here. Like real money. If I'm going to be a con man, why would I go around conning homeless people out of their change? That seems like a horrible con, not just morally, but it's not really financially beneficially for me, right? It's not really financially beneficial. If I'm going to be a con man, I'd probably try to con people that have money out of their money, because that would be the whole purpose of the con. But what we have is something that blurs the line a little bit, and that is the emergence of influencer culture and left media, especially left online media. So are they grifters? Are they trying to con you? Or are they influencers? And their product is maybe contrarian outrage? Maybe the product is anti-capitalism? We have to understand that the Overton window has been shifted to the point where anti-capitalism is marketable. Squid Games, Parasite, Joker, Nomadland. These are major motion pictures and TV shows that are anti-capitalist and extremely popular. When I leave here and go to the border, there's people that sell stuff, and they sell the Squid Game masks at the border, the vendors. Capitalist realism of anti-capitalism. Influencer culture. We talk about it all. Derek Varn, Djene Bajalan interviewed me on my piece. Grift sells, but who's buying? That's what I wanted to call it. Djene wouldn't let me, and I am out.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to This is Revolution. My name is Djene Bajalan. I will be your host today, and I would just like to remind all our subscribers out there, or if you're not a subscriber, make sure you are a subscriber, hit the bell, hit the like icon, all the things that you're supposed to do in order to follow a YouTube/podcast. So I am in today for your usual hosts. It is Christmas time, although this is a pre-record. So I am speaking to you all from the past. And I'm very excited today for our show because we have a very special guest and a very special co-host. So before we get to our guest, I would like to introduce our co-host for the day. He is the bad dad of the left. He is Doug's Lane's mortal enemy. He is Derek Varn. Welcome, Varn. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. You're getting good at your NPR voice.
So. I'm trying my best. It is a learning process. I would say I am not quite there yet because I totally forgot what I was supposed to say at the beginning. But it is great to be hosting tonight, and I'm really excited about our special guest today. So without further ado, allow me to introduce a guest for today. He is the Regent, Jason Myles.
Thank you. I am so much of a guest today. I'm interfacing through the show, not through the production interface. I'm actually on the guest side of the show, so I have no control of moving the screen or doing this. And this. That makes
I need to get my own soundboard eventually so that we can have soundboard battles. I think Varn, you should totally get a soundboard.
You have to get a soundboard.
Yeah, you need a soundboard for Varn blog, definitely. I think it would be very helpful. It would definitely improve your production. Well, the reason I'm hosting today is because we actually want to discuss a piece that Jason has written. It is a piece that he's published on Medium, so I'm just going to put that up on the screen. You can check out Jason's piece in Medium, and basically, it is a piece that is discussing the question of left media, the culture wars, influencer culture, and the grift. So, before we go on, Jason, could you tell us a little bit about the piece you wrote, why you wrote it, and what's the thesis?
I wrote so originally I was trying to write part 2 of a piece I wrote about using, punk music to talk about different political movements. And I'm all getting ready to write part 2, and I actually went on Sam Cedar's show to do that, and Djene had said maybe we should get Sam on our show to talk about left media in general. And in getting Sam Cedar on our show, I didn't have to watch, but I watched a documentary about Air America. I knew a little bit about Air America, but at that time, I wasn't consuming that much media in the early aughts. And when Sam was on our show, I was kind of blown away by the comments. And I understand that there's parasocial relationships, and I really feel like Varn actually made that word probably more common in our sphere when he did a thing on parasocial relationships. I think that was last year. But anyway,
It was.
Anyway, the response that we got, not from everybody, of course, but from a small group of people, was so angry and seemed a bit absurd, and then just silly. So I get all the comments. They all get emailed to me, and I deal with all the comments from all our social media. And for the most part, they're pretty positive. But it's never fun to have people tell you to fuck off in whatever way they want to tell you to fuck off. And I'm not from a world where it's common to tell people crazy shit because you think you're never going to see them. But these comments weren't even enough to make me mad. It just kind of made me shake my head. One person had said that we were grifters because we had Sam Cedar on the show because our end goal was to interview AOC and then not ask AOC tough questions. So
I mean, one of those comments I seem to remember was somebody said like having Sam Cedar on your show was like a defining issue of the left. Like,
Sam Cedar single-handedly destroys working class movements, and he's anti-black was another comment.
Yeah, it's utterly like hyperbolic language, which is completely, I would say hysterical, like a kind of hysterical language about Sam Cedar, who, whether you like him or not, whether you think his content is good or not, he's a person who does a YouTube show and a podcast where he interviews academics, and then does news roundups, and you can agree with him or disagree with him. Yeah. But the notion that like Sam Cedar is somehow single-handedly stopping the proletarian revolution in the United States is one of the most insane things I can imagine.
And so reading that, I think I screenshotted it, Derek, and there's a group chat we have, me, Djene, Kuba, and Pascal, and I sent it to the group chat. And I remember screenshotting a lot of the comments, and my mind was blown. Because first of all, if you think it would have been funnier or a little more accurate if they're like, you just want to interview AOC and like hit on her. I'm like, yeah, maybe, I don't know, but that would have been a little more like, but to say that all I want to do is not ask her tough.
Oh, we've lost Jason for a moment. I'm sure he will come back. Well, just to kind of, there he is. He returns.
Sorry, I didn't have any connection issues for the other pre-record we did, and I didn't have any connection, and now I have them. But it to think that that's all that we wanted to do, and that was going to be some sort of benefit to us, that was going to be financially beneficial, because ultimately you're assuming that there's a financial benefit to doing that, is extremely foolish, because the return really isn't there, because a lot of things have to happen. Derek knows as well as any of us know, just because you may have a more popular person on your show, you're probably going to get a few more views. Maybe you get a super chat or two, maybe. But a lot has to go in to that person retweeting your show and really talking about being on your show and shit like that. So a person like AOC goes on a bunch of little bullshit shows. She's not going to really give too much of a shit about coming on mine. I'd be lucky if I got 10 minutes from someone like that. And then they move on to the next thing. And there's just no real benefit in that. And to be so delusional that you think of the world strictly in terms of your imagination of what podcaster wealth must look like it was funny to me because it reminded me of music and listening to kids talk about bands who they thought were successful or rich because maybe they had a video on MTV at the time that was still a thing, or maybe they saw them on a big tour and they assumed these people were rich and they had no idea that these guys are like, you know, painting houses when they're not on the road, or, you know, they work 9 to 5 jobs when they're not on the road. So that whole thing, it made me go, you know, I don't like the term grifter because I don't think people understand the term grifter. So I went and rewatched the movie The Grifters.
I've never seen that movie, but I just want to kind of follow up on a point that you made. It's like, you know, obviously there is a correlation between, you know, fame and wealth, right? You know, that, you know, those things can go together, but it's by no means a one-to-one correlation. You know, there are plenty of people, you know, working in the podcast sphere, working in the music industry, working as actors, working as relatively successful writers who, you know, maybe at best they have like a middle-class lifestyle. Maybe they do it to supplement, you know, as kind of extra on a day job. But, you know, just because you see somebody on the YouTubes, just because you see somebody even on the television, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're making a lot of money, and especially in sort of left YouTube, right? You know, if you want to make money doing political commentary, you go to the political right. On left YouTube, you may be successful and hit it rates. You might be, you know, like a Hassan Abi, or I don't know who else, you know, like, or a Chapo or something like that. But even with like somebody like Hassan Abi or Chapo, you know, like, they had like a built-in advantage because of their connections to pre-existing media infrastructures anyway. Right. You know, like, you know, it's like these guys didn't come out of nowhere. I'm not saying they don't have talent or what.
But it's talent doing what though? Like when you speak to Hassan, and I'd love to hear Derek's response to this. And this isn't a slight on Hassan. I don't know him, but I think Hassan is the epitome of the left internet influencer. I mean, there's a reason why he's on a platform like Twitch, a platform that was made for esports, people to sit there and watch people play video games. Hassan is the equivalent of, from the little bit that I've seen, watching somebody play video games.
One thing that is going to come up as we talk about it today with me is I think a lot of this is kind of downstream of the media theatrics around the culture war, and we'll get to like what I think is going on there. But I also think people have to really know both the background and how hard you can work and not make money. Like someone as famous as Ben Burgess is, as a left media personality, I'm not going to out what he makes, but I can tell you that I'm a public school teacher with 15 years experience and I make more than him. And I know that for a fact. We've talked about it. So even someone with a relatively wide berth, name recognition, gets on cable news a fair amount, can basically turn a middle-class lifestyle. The exceptions are people who come out of media backgrounds. That's not true for every person involved in Chapo, but it's true for at least 2 of them. And I don't know, a profile in the New Yorker and some power backers and some relationships to things like Gawker before that really do help. The other thing I could say is I've been doing this for 10 years, and I don't think there's been a year that I've made more than 10 grand off of this. And for most of my career as a podcaster, I think I lost something like $500 in maintaining it until Chapo happened, and then we were able to finally start turning, a profit. Now, if you think any political action for a profit is a grift, then yes, we are all grifters, but then so are the people you like. I was telling you my theory about this, which is a little bit different, but similar to yours. I read your piece, and I basically said to you privately, I think I maybe said it to you publicly, I wish some of these people were grifters. They would actually probably make better, more rational decisions if they were totally self-interested. But what I think is actually going on is people are frustrated with prior investment syndrome, for lack of a better term. The idea that their investment into a politics as an extension of their self has led to their need to monitor that is very similar to the same dynamic, and kind of frankly has the same stakes as people's investiture into taste as an extension of their self. And thus, it does rhyme with scene wars in music. It rhymes with, in my world, poetry wars, which you talk about the lowest stakes ever, but we are like the most vicious people to each other over the smallest, like how you broke a line and what comma probably says you're a racist. So like so and I'm only kind of being sarcastic, but I do think we have to look at why it would feel that way, because in a lull in the political milieu, and I think we all have to admit the Biden period has been a weird lull for the left because it was so invested into Bernie beforehand, and now has spun out in 1,000 different directions. To maintain itself requires energy and or money. And that's going to seem like a grift, because the more you are involved in the media scene, the more you have to make certain trade-offs. What I find hilarious about this is this has been true for 100 years, and it was not just true for people we would consider insincere actors or demagogues or anything like that. It was true in the SPA, having to maintain its funds and having to take some weird positions to do it. It was, and having to court people who were famous, like for example, Debs. We've had our discussion about Debs before. I was even on part of that episode, but like Debs became kind of a celebrity cause for the SPA to keep people invested in it. So even though Debs was a far more heroic figure in the history of socialism than a lot of the people we might be talking about today, there was still a lot of resentment of him within the SPA, because he was such a celebrity figure, even for the 1920s, before we had much mass media. And so this dynamic is as old as the left has had access to the media to be.
Well, that's an interesting thing to talk about, the turn of the century and the advent of Hollywood. And I believe the writer's name is Kurt Anderson. Is he the guy that wrote about nostalgia? I think that's his name. And he talks about, before Hollywood, you had to do something great to be famous. Fly across the goddamn country, write the great novel, be a war general. You would have to do something great. And Hollywood really changes that, because what makes you great in Hollywood? You're the prettiest, right? Because we're talking about silent films. So go from 1920 to 2021, 100 years later, it's magnified with social media, the internet at your fingertips, and now an influencer culture, with a younger generation, who the generation before is my generation and your generation, Derek, where our touchstone moments as children is watching, 22-minute toy commercials.
Yeah, I mean, we are the first generation of memory that was totally exposed and grew up completely saturated in a thing where everything was a crypto commercial, and that's true for influencers too.
Well, I think there's an important I agree, with Hollywood, with mass consumerism, there's definitely this sort of more capitalistic culture. There's definitely, capitalism proves itself, very adept at reincorporating even radical critiques after the 60s. There is no counterculture. Everything can be monetarized. Everything can be part of the mainstream. But I think one of the things you point to, Jason, is look, in the 1990s, we had this innovation of reality TV, which proved extremely powerful. And, you could be just a random person and you could be picked up and you could have no real discernible skills. But as long as you were entertaining enough for people to watch, even if they
not horribly deformed,
or even if you were there would there would be heels that people hated, but you would have this kind of TV where it's just you don't even have to have acting abilities. You just put somebody in front of a camera and you see what happens. Big Brother was the big one in the UK. I'm sure you
Real World
in the Real World here. And I had friends that were on the early Real World. I was friends with Mohammed on the early Real World. And what's interesting about that, Djene, and if I'm cutting you off, I'll shut right up. I just want to make this point, was to your point, the problem with the early Real World was there was no drama. If you remember the early one, maybe you don't remember because you weren't here, the early Real Worlds, some of the people that were local had real jobs.
Yep, it was boring.
Muhammad he didn't like being in the house because those people were crazy. And you don't want to be portrayed as an asshole on a camera. So they had to change the whole way they did things. They found that alcohol worked. If you watch the transformation of that show, people get real pretty over time.
They get prettier, they get drunker.
Yep.
I think it's the season with the bike messenger that everybody hated.
It's
sad that it's the sad that I know this actually. But that's the one where you see real social engineering going on to constantly create conflict.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I had a friend who worked as a producer on Big Brother, and his job was literally to engineer situations on Big Brother that would cause, entertaining things to happen. But the point I wanted to make was that sort of taking just regular people, without a particular training in acting. Because, at least, when you look at the Hollywood era, you have to have some acting ability. Otherwise, yes. When they put Matt Lazenby as James Bond, it was a freaking disaster. So, you had to have some basic talent to be entertaining or some screen presence. What's happened, though, with the proliferation of social media is that whereas in the 90s, the kind of reality TV and authentic TV that I think the authenticity is what people liked about these shows has been democratized because it doesn't need to be curated by a TV channel. You just need to get a hot Vine, as when Vine was a thing, or a hot TikTok. I'll tell you a story. I was heading to the MSU gym, and there was a young lady giving a tour for the students, right? Taking them around the gym, and the thing the student said to these younger kids who were thinking of coming to MSU was like, "Oh, one of our lifeguard is a real TikTok star. He has 1 million views, right?" So all this kind of stuff. All this authenticity, which I think reality TV was picking up on, the desire to have something that was real, right? Or at least felt real, has been democratized by social media, right? And this is I think this is a paradigm of entertainment that has seeped into other fields, including left media culture.
What I would add to that, and something that I would say that actually both the democratizing is fake. Pareto distribution actually completely holds to influencers just like it does to almost every other media field. And what Pareto distribution means is that 20% of the people involved really benefit. There's no discernible there are things that would disqualify you from being able to benefit, such as being unable to talk, being particularly stupid, although a certain amount of stupidity is rewarded, being, not being willing to work, being totally undisciplined. This will cut you out. But the appearance in the top 20% is basically luck. So once those factors are taken in, it's luck and who you know and what support that you have priorly. That's true for influencers as well, because what you will find with a lot of influencers now is they have backdoor hidden corporate sponsorships. Just like the idea when Patreon came on that there was this organic movement of left podcasters, and then we have this over proliferation of left podcasts, which I have lived through. When I started podcasting as a left podcaster, there was 5 that were not Pacifica radio shows. All right. And that's worldwide. And we made no money. Like we all lost money. It was all a passion project. And the lead up to the Bernie campaign happened and it all shifted. Now, my contention about grifting that I mentioned earlier that complicates, Jason's point a little bit, is that I saw this happen before in the death of libertarian podcasting, which was the dominant form of political podcasting until about 2011, 2012. And then it dramatically faded off. One, tech bros tended to be libertarian, so that was who they had the most purchase with. But 2, it was a easy investment, marginal political philosophy that had a high ideological contingent with a very low social investment. So what do I mean by that? That it doesn't take much to declare it. You don't actually lose that much in most social circles, particularly social circles you are already in, for declaring it. And yet there's a whole lot to maintain. And these things tend to blow up and explode. And they completely exploded around 2014 with the buildup of the alt-right into Trump, because you started seeing key figures move towards the right nationalist direction. I bring that up because we would love to believe that those people were just grifting their way from being libertarians to white nationalists. But what I think we would actually see is a progression of incentives that actually to themselves makes it seem like they are organically changing their mind. So calling people grifters is useless in a very real sense, unless you know for a fact someone doesn't believe what they say. And that is very hard to know. But tends to happen, I think, is that the milieu gets stalled. And then you need that energy, as I mentioned earlier. So we talked about the media focus of this, but let's talk about the political focus of this. The left has habituses. It has invested a lot of itself in going back to before any of us were born, and we aren't young. So at least to the early 1960s. And this is tied to media culture. But so you would have sectarian groups emerge in the new left that had a lot of investment, that they split for a bunch of reasons. They would have these media projects that were actually all very niche, because the technology meant that producing media was super expensive compared to now. But with all that said, you still had these divisions and these need to keep up this momentum, particularly after the seeming break wave of 68 in Europe, 69 in the United States, where there's all kinds of momentum. And what happens is people get addicted to maintaining these media forms, or they get addicted to something else, which is basically going and picking fights with the cops, so that you have the rush of legitimacy that you had in those initial real organic protests. And what it barrels out in the 70s is people becoming media stars and depoliticizing in a lot of ways. I can mention a few Black Panthers if you want me to, who definitely did this.
Who's the one who did the cooking show?
Bobby Seale.
Bobby Seale.
But that wasn't, it was not just the Panthers. Like there's a lot of famous, marginal political figures, from David Horowitz to Rob Reich, who were to Robert Reich, who were all like either in Maoist or Trotskyist groups in the late 60s, early 70s.
Well, Robert Reich was in the Clinton White House. I forgot what position he had.
But he was also tangential to the RCP and the students and the SDS. So what you see there is that happened. I don't think those people were grifters. I don't think they didn't believe in their radical politics when they were in it, nor do I think they were lying about their politics 30 years later. I think the incentives are there so you to make certain choices. And so one of the things I've actually pointed out about Sam Seder is, Sam Seder's politics aren't my politics. They're not anyone here's politics, really.
True that.
But to attribute a YouTube show and a guy who is and this is going to sound like an insult, and I actually don't mean it to be, but the less successful party of a guy who was on a show with Mark Maron, with a kind of mystical power to stop some kind of proletarian movement, is itself an indication that you are overly invested in the importance of media and the importance of your own political identity.
I would agree.
Go ahead, Gene. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to not push back, but sort of perhaps contextualize. I said sort of the democratization, like the shift, the rise of social media leads to democratization. You're right. It's not, democratization isn't the right word. It leads to more opportunities for disrupting the traditional media networks. Mm-hmm. So, you do still need money, but, like in the past, you needed access to television. So social media provides alternative access where your money goes further. I mean, we see this with new media challenges around the world where, like in the past, it was pretty expensive to have like a worldwide cable TV channel. Now, every country in the world can have its own worldwide sort of news network because the technology is a lot cheaper and easier to do. So I think there is a shift in this, but yes, it's not quite democratization. It's more opportunities for disruption and the disruption of the kind of media monopolies that existed in the past because the technology is just easier, cheaper, and you can sort of, which of course brings around its own problem because it leads to this fragmentation and it leads to the creation of even greater media bubbles where you are in a bubble where you actually think Sam Seder is like the bad guy of like the universe.
And that boils down to like a way that you have to view the world, and you're constantly viewing the world through a very bourgeois capitalist good bad binary. And if you think Sam Seder is bad because he didn't like force the vote, how did he then kill a working class movement? Let's just say you think force the vote is a real movement outside of the online world, which it wasn't. How does he kill that more than the pharmaceutical companies or private insurance?
Or even something pathetically small like modern media that's got...
And who didn't even talk about it. It wasn't even a talking point because it was such an online phenomenon. And that whole thing, again, it really blew my mind because it let me know that regardless of what I think I'm doing with the show, I'm talking to people that may have a relationship with me parasocially, and maybe they're missing a certain point. Maybe they don't understand where I am politically. Maybe they don't understand maybe even where they are politically, like realistically. When I did music, one thing I didn't like about music was that, people are always posting pictures of their shows from the perspective of like, look how successful I am, look how good I'm doing, look how fun my life is. And I never liked that because touring is hard and there's fun aspects to it, but it sucks when you're playing for the bartender, knowing people that would take, if they did get a good opening gig, they're taking pictures of the headliners crowd and not there and not theirs. Like that's a bit dishonest. And there's a lot of that to a certain degree in what we do, where there's some level of overstating little milestones you may be having to seem like you're more popular, which to me seems like a bit of a waste of time. I was just recently talking to Doug, and we were talking about this. And another thing that was a influence on my writing was that HBO did, and I did say I'm going to give people my HBO password. I still am going to do it. I think I'm going to do it around Christmas time, and it's only going to be for a day, so you guys are going to have a day to watch it. But there's some documentary on HBO about influencer culture, and they took 3 people that were they had less than 300 Instagram followers, and they turned them into Instagram influencers, and they created everything. And what was really surprising to me was they had one young lady that had got a modeling offer because she had so many followers, over 100,000 followers at this point, most of whom were bought and paid for. And it wasn't just the followers, it was the engagement they paid for with likes. And they also paid for comments, which I didn't know you could pay for comments.
You totally can.
Which I thought was like, whoa. So they tell her, well, we're going to do a background check to make sure that you have these are real organic followers. So the people behind the show are like, oh shit. So they went and got the same program, ran it through, and she passed. She of course passes the check on the company that hired her, and they were like, there's so much money. The conclusion they come to is there's so much money in this influencer culture that even the software that's supposed to check to see if people have fake accounts isn't legit.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and there's no way to oversee it. I mean, like, I think about the fact that as soon as I actually get less of it now as I've grown, but as soon as I hit like 500 subscribers on YouTube to my pathetic little YouTube channel, I started getting people in India and Russia like writing me to like just watch, like for me to pay like $40 for them to watch my video 1,000 times on a computer software. And knowing that and knowing what the scales are, I mean, but I also want people to put even assuming all this is organic, let's have some reality about numbers here, because I think also people don't catch this reality when they talk about like the DSA at 100,000 and which is doubled in a year and whatever. We can have the discussions about if that's important or if it's not. But what I would say is, okay, even the most successful YouTubes and the most successful Patreons are going to have at most 1 million subscribers. The average eyes on a Sam Cedar video, just looking at a week, ranges between 4,000K views, which is better than what I do, but not a lot, and 81,000K views for a worldwide audience. Now, that seems like a lot. I mean, it would fill up a football stadium if it was live, plus some. However, here's the population of the United States, 320 million. Assuming that, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, something like 68% of them are employed in some way. Now, that includes all kinds of people we might not include, but draw some kind of wage. The amount of not understanding laws of large numbers that you have to have for that to be the rubric in which you're judging the success of a mass movement in the United States is like, it's laughably funny as soon as you take 30 seconds to look up those numbers on YouTube and on Google. Like, and I say this because Sam Cedar is a successful left media personality and has been for a long time. His left is not my left. I mean, he's somewhere between a leftist and a liberal. But that doesn't change the fact that he's not a threat to the global proletariat. None of us are that important. Even Chapo, which is probably by far the most likely left media project you're going to see people have engaged with who are not totally politicos. I go to my work. I've never met a person who's listened to it. I've only met one person who's even heard about it.
Yep.
So, like, We don't all live in Greenpoint.
Exactly. It's one of the things about the internet and left media is that there's a contradictory effect, right? On one hand, obviously, prior to the social media age, prior to the internet, being a leftist in Springfield, Missouri, or in some small town somewhere, you were isolated, right? So, this left media sphere has Twitter, these things have allowed people to sort of connect together in a way that didn't exist before. But on the flip side, it creates the fragmentation of social media creates a bubble where we tend to, where people on the left tend to overestimate their power and influence. Because, of course, if you're consuming media out of a similar ecosystem, you tend to see, you tend to think of the discussions that are taking place in your ecosystem as being discussions that have general purchase with the public, and that's completely understandable. But and it's probably people feel that more in the age of COVID when they're not really interacting with people to the same degree as they did in the past. So they're even more online than before. So it can, on one hand, I think it kind of helps the left in that it's like linked people together. It's made people feel like, okay, I'm not crazy for thinking the system is terrible. I'll give you a story, for example. Like I had a friend whose dad was an atheist in Kurdistan in like the 1970s, and he was like a very religious guy, and he started praying. Like praying and being like, I don't believe this. This is all crazy, right? Like, am I the only person in the whole universe who, doesn't believe in God, because he's in a circumstance where like everybody is a Muslim, everyone's practicing. And then suddenly he found a book, I think by Sartre or something, translated in Turkish. I was like, oh, I'm actually not the only person who thinks this way. So, people who have had, like there's a whole media infrastructure in which people can like look to that is critiquing, the dominant political system and economic system in various ways. And that can be seen as a positive thing. But then I think the flip side is that people get drawn into that, and, people get sucked into thinking that their consumption of online media is their left-wing politics when it is not. Right. I think one thing that we're clear about on This Is Revolution is like we provide entertainment to a certain degree, and we try to provide, some entertainment, some levity, and some education at the same time. We're not trying to do political activism, because I don't think any of us would see doing political activism via the YouTubes as being
you can't meaningful. Look, if you're doing this, you're not an activist, because activists they go out and do activist shit. They're organizing. They're constantly trying to strategize. They have a plan. There's projects they're working on. And I say this because I'm friends with some real deal activists. And sometimes you don't see them most of the time you don't see them on my show. I may talk to these people quite often. You'll never see them on the show. It's not something they want to do because they get shit for it.
Right.
What are you doing going on that show? You're one of those now?
Yeah. I mean, I was actually talking to my partner is more of an activist than me, and I have been an activist, and those worlds are so completely different. Just like, I do union work still. I'm a rep. And this does not really overlap with that at all. Yes, the same perspective informs both, but I wouldn't also be going out and interviewing my fellow union members unless I thought it was going to help an actual cause, because otherwise I am profiteering off of something that I think is super important in my daily immediate skin in the game life. So and when I say that, that is not to say that what we do is of no importance, but it is to say that it is not the same thing as doing political activism or activism of any kind. Mm-hmm. I would also sometimes I'm going to take this a little bit broader though than just this problem with the left media. The investiture of people's identities into their political positions, to my mind, functions very similar, frankly, to religion. And I know that's an uncomfortable thing to say, but
no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I remember there was a band, maybe you remember them, Derek, maybe you don't, a band called Zayo.
I vaguely remember them. Yeah.
Late 90s, early 2000s. They were a Christian hardcore band that kind of, I don't want to say they started that shit, but they kind of started that Christian-y metalcore shit that was so prevalent in the aughts.
You know
what I'm saying? And from a bit of an underground perspective, like the Solid State Records, if people remember Solid State Records and shit like that. But I remember them saying that they didn't want to be a Christian hardcore band because they said, who the fuck goes around and says, hi, I'm Sally, I'm your Christian teacher, I'm your Christian plumber.
Right.
And they didn't want that to be first when describing their music. But now your political affiliation has to be first. I'm an ML. I'm a full-on tanky, or I'm a sock dem with ML tendencies. It's like, Jesus, you sure do want to put yourself in a box, don't you?
Yeah, it's actually, to me, that is a sign. Not that engaging in fidelity to a political tradition is necessarily bad, but that's the first thing that comes out of your mouth, then it is a sign that it is a scene identity for me. Mm-hmm. Like that this is a scene for you, that it's about the reinforcement of your own social and moral identity as much as it is about a politics outside of yourself. And I say that, with, like, I have a very anti-sectarian bent in some ways, and then other times I'll tell people, yeah, but I'm a sectarian of one because I believe what I believe and I will fight you over it. Mm-hmm. But if I really believe in politics as an expression of social will, all right, that is not just an imposition of power from without by a gun, or which is also makes it sound like I don't believe this would be violent, and it probably would have to be, but that I must believe that there are a wide range of acceptable opinions and belief systems for an actual politics to work, because when you see real political policies in the world, even within a fairly homogenous one-party state, like say the PRC, there are massive divisions within it, and they still function. So the idea that there would be no political friction within a like-minded political group is utopianism in the worst sense. It's basically just wishing that the conditions that lead us to have these divisions, which are not all even within our own control, frankly, would just go away so that we would have nice, clean identity markers. And that's not the world I've ever lived in. I think if you were to take a sampling of, like any of us, if we were to try to put together a political program, we could probably do it. But there would be like asterisks on each thing where one of us had something snarky to say. Like,
I think, but I don't know what you guys think of this, but at least for a certain section of, let's say, this new wave of leftists who have like moved lefts since the Bernie campaign, right? Yeah. Who have been politicized by the Sanders movement, who've become consumers of left media. And obviously, this is not the entire activist left or anything like that. It seems to me in the past, sectarianism within the left was a result of, ideological differences, question of the Soviet Union, anarchism, Maoism, Trotskyism, social democracy, and things like that.
Also, surviving in a situation in the West that was innately hostile to you, so to maintain that belief system would require like a certain amount of fanaticism just in general.
But today, it strikes me a lot of the sectarianism we see in the left is beginning to gravitate around like which media you choose to consume and choose to believe. So it's not that people have any particular hard ideological position, but they develop a parasocial relation with a particular individual or group of individuals, consume their media, and then begin to believe the people with whom that group is hostile to are the enemy. Hence, we end up with people who seem to believe that, like, whether if having platforming Sam Cedar is a defining issue for a leftist, right?
Right.
Well,
yeah.
Back to those comments, it was like, if you weren't down with forced to vote, then that means that you want a private healthcare system. Like these were comments that were being left. Like you weren't down with this totally online movement that had any sort of real world outreach, that wasn't connected with any real people that have been involved.
And honestly, didn't have a real goal either, because the goal wasn't to get Medicare for all passed. It was to expose the hypocrisy of the Democrats, as if the entire fucking world couldn't see that already.
Yeah, and not just that. What I never got was like, even if the vote failed, right?
Which
and
it
they
would.
were like, which it would, and they admitted it would. They would like, we'd know who's voting against Medicare for all. But if it's going to fail, there's going to be a bunch of people that Nancy Pelosi says you can vote for it to protect yourself because it doesn't have a chance of passing, right? Just like when everybody was sponsoring Medicare for all in the Congress and the Senate, when it was politically expedient to do. Now, I'm not saying that, the notion that, the congressional progressives should play hardball or things like that is necessarily a bad thing, or like critiquing them is necessarily a bad thing. I'm not even like, I don't even want to actually get into the really, and I just did, but getting to the sort of utility of forced to vote. There may be good arguments for forced to vote as well, but it just seemed it seemed to devolve into a personality. A personality politics, which, and I'm not going to
based on people who used to work with each other. If we're completely,
it's rat beef. It was rat beef.
Or even if it wasn't, it became rat beef, right? Even if it wasn't, it devolved into a kind of which social media celebrity and which social YouTube channel do you like the most? Right.
And let's keep this in context first for one hot second too. I don't think this happens without COVID. Without COVID, that whole thing wouldn't have happened.
Because no one could do anything else other than what the Floyd protests were the only other manifestation. And
I always add, Jordan Peterson going away, for a lot of people, not everybody, but for a lot of people, it really hurt the content that they were producing, because that was rather good, clickable content that you could feel good about, because you like, this is a vile figure, and I want to call out the hypocrisy in his statements and the uselessness of his arguments and how foolish he is. Okay, I get it. All right, that's your thing. But when he goes away, and when kind of Sam Harris goes away,
I mean, at the end of the day, it's not just that, though. It's also, I think, it's the defeat of the left. Corbynism in the United Kingdom and Sandersism were defeated, right?
But they were defeated partly because of these tendencies. Because if you were looking at objective things on the ground, it was impossible to not notice that that even in 2020 in particular, that the Democrats had a weak bench, and that they were divided, and thus it looked like Bernie could pull off something like Trump did, where you had a bunch of centrists who stayed into the race way too long and kept their vote divided, and then later on maybe you would have a consolidation. But that wasn't really in the cards.
And people overestimated how much of the Bernie vote was actually just the "I hate Hillary Clinton" vote.
Right. Yeah, particularly in the upper Midwest.
Yeah, she's like super despised. So people, like you could imagine a scenario where he might have fluked a presidential win, but even then, without a friendly Congress, his political agenda was kind of stymied from the beginning. I think overall, it might have been good to have a Sanders president, but to think that would have been a panacea for the social problems hitting the United States was a thing. In Labour, the challenge was more serious because of the nature of the parliamentary system, but also the kind of assault from the establishment was, was vigorous.
And to that point, you did have a lot of, I think more so post AOC and the for women's win, was it Ilhan and Rashida and
I think it really coalesces around when you see Cory Bush. Yeah.
But let's just go back to 2018 when they win those seats. Everybody starts calling them socialists. Maybe they play with the terminology a little bit. And then you get more progressives and socialists, self-proclaimed progressives and socialists running for federal and small local offices. A lot of them lost. You did see a lot of them making the podcaster rounds, which is kind of interesting when you think about it. Because if you're running a localized campaign,
a podcast is a very weird way to do it.
Weird way to do it. It's a very weird way to do it. And I would love to know where funding dollars were coming from a lot of those people, because it's like, if you're running a campaign in San Francisco, like a guy like Shahid Buttar, I would love to know where a lot of his money was coming from. He was definitely making all the podcaster rounds and On the Hill and all those other shows. But here you have a person that's trying to take out probably the most powerful person in Congress, in Nancy Pelosi, and doesn't get a whiff of the votes that it would take to unseat her. And he became a victim of like leftist YouTube beef with an article that came out about him on The Intercept, actually. That Glenn Greenwald actually defended him when he was still at The Intercept. But it makes me ask the question about where people's priorities are if you despise Nancy Pelosi so much. Well, here's the guy running against her that allegedly has a platform that is right up your alley.
Well, just like liberals, right? Like one of the pathologies of like liberals in the United States is their obsession with national level politics, vis-a-vis, the Republicans who play a much smarter game. Like, you can, like, there are many you can cry about the American political system all day long, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah, whining about abolishing the Senate when you don't have the power to even win the Senate is kind of funny.
Yeah, so like I agree with most of the criticisms about American democracy, but like the problem with liberals is, of course, they always think that you elect a president and then they can all go home and it will be fine, whereas the Republicans, they've all read their Gramsci and they're playing war of position, right? They're like they're seizing.
They actually really have. I mean, like one thing that I when I was on the conservative side of things 15, 20 years ago, they would they were the people telling me to read leftist strategic stuff, not leftist. I mean, this was back before all this stuff was popular again. This is like, around 9/11. And I'm like, the fight was between what would probably become now the beginnings of Trumpism in the paleoconservative movement versus the neoconservatives. But there was this whole focus on like, do community building like Phyllis Schlafly did with Saul Al-Kalinsky, because Phyllis Schlafly used Saul Al-Kalinsky way better than Saul Al-Kalinsky did. Which, by the way, there's reasons for that materially, even that Saul Al-Kalinsky's would actually help the right more than it help the left. That's a whole nother day. But also like use Gramsci, use cultural hegemony, make sure that you polarize people through culture war stuff, because you can never deliver it, but people will be highly invested forever if you do that.
Yep.
So like, and this is ironically what I would say is some of these people aren't cynical enough about electoral politics, and I mean this in a very real way, because I'm like, okay, forced to vote, whatever. Build a People's Party. Sure, that's not going to be the Green Party 3.5 or whatever. But why do you think that you're going to have an ability to hold a politician accountable more than the people paying for their reelection campaigns? Because there's no evidence for that, and you actually know it in a person like Kristen Sinema.
Right.
Who was
a Green Party person?
Who was a Green Party person? Who was a Green?
Fought with the cops in Occupy. Like,
this is the crazy. I mean, like, everybody's always on DSA's back about things, but at least one thing that DSA has been trying to do, however problematic, however weak they do it, trying to like run people for local councils and things like that.
That actually is the smartest thing.
That's the smartest thing that they've done, because like I think like the Bernie Sanders campaign, it mobilized a lot of people, but it also sort of it injected this liberal notion that seizing the commanding heights of national politics is the way to do like left-wing politics, that you can do it through.
But they seem to think that we were both a Bonapartist and a parliamentary system, and we are neither of those things.
So like when people, like lots to criticize DSA about, but this idea that DSA, the thing DSA is doing with organizing to run for city councils as it's like foundational. If you're going to do any electoralism, this is where the energy should be directed at.
And that's where like your municipality, like your police budgets come from, and your housing,
and you can deliver at least something to people. But you can deliver concrete gains. I mean, like for there was the sewer socialism that they used to have in the United States. Again, reformist or problematic depending on your perspective, but more effective at least at counterbalancing sort of right-wing politics.
Well, so chase to Canada, but whatever.
This is I think another, like, one of the problems with the existence of the online left is that it directs political energy to a national sphere,
right,
rather than a local sphere. And
because you're on the internet, right?
Because you're on the internet, and not only that, it means you get a whole load of fucking people, whether they're doing it as a inverted comma or grift or not, in Canada, in Britain, in Australia, whose entire political discourse is nothing to do with where they live, is all about like the latest AOC scandal.
Yep.
And some people might
it's not even like serious political analysis of America or China or any of that.
It's just it's just AOC did this, AOC did that. And what I find striking is, like, you could say that those people are cynical, like the Canadians who talk about US politics all the time, the Brits who do it, the very, very
I mean, they do make up a large section of the American conservative punditry historically, actually. It's like Brits and Canadians coming over here being the smart people for the American right. But yes.
But I think I don't think in every case it's necessarily even that's a deliberate choice. It's just they get dragged into this huge kind of political tumult, which is like interesting, right? It's like more interesting. It's more exciting. It's like, it becomes like WWF wrestling. For people,
it's interesting when you don't care about your own. I think that leads in more to what I was talking about with the whole influencer thing. If you want to be an influencer, then you want to, you don't want to create a brand. You want to, I wish I could influence for such and such brand because they got all the money. So if you're trying to get on YouTube, and I don't think you don't feel those ways about the Democratic Party in the States, or maybe think AOC did do something foolish or isn't living up to her progressive bona fides, and you want to comment on it. That's interesting, I guess. But I find it very, very fascinating that a lot of these non-Americans never really got into the atrocities of the places that were happening where they lived until it became an American story, like i.e. the schools in Canada. What are the schools called? Where they put the names?
Residential schools.
Residential schools.
Yeah, that should have been a thing for a lot longer than. I mean,
But
I don't know.
it's the gravitational weight of American political culture.
Yeah, and they let it shift them, and that's something that's hard. Yeah, you know what
I'm going to actually push back on that because, like, I don't know. The American political culture that I know is highly influenced by French academics and British activists who brought their shit over here, and when we sold it back to them in our American ways, they complained about it. Like, there's a certain amount of like, daddy's pissed off that the son is doing what daddy did. That's going on with, particularly in the European and American context. I take those complaints much more seriously when they come from Latin America, are from Africa, are from Asia, and by and large, they don't come from there.
No, they don't. That's I mean, that's the thing, like the Turkish media world, for example, is like they're not like doing podcasts on AOC all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Like,
there's real shit going on over there.
Like the Mexican left is not obsessed with Bernie Sanders in the same way,
as Canadians seem to be.
Like certain amounts of, and to be fair, Americans used to have a similar we don't anymore. But when international media first opened up, I had a weird parasocial relationship with British politics because it's the former hegemon of the world, and it's not my problem. They look like funny people in weird accents yelling at each other on TV on C-SPAN. That's kind of amusing. And like it was interesting as a way to learn the differences between our politics. What we've seen is, I think there's some amount of like, particularly, and I don't mean to turn this into an American versus British thing, Gina. I mean, you're Kurd. You're not really invested in the other side. But there is a sense in which, like, both sides, and I mean this even in the general public, not even in this left sphere, use the other's politics as an out. Now, America doesn't do it as much to Britain as Britain does it to us. Yeah, no. Occasionally you'll see like, oh, Boris Johnson means that our shit with Trump was not that bad.
Well, I think I totally agree. I mean, I think especially, for America, like Americans are kind of parochial anyway. But if you're outside of America, it's hard to ignore America. And I think for Brits and Canadians,
the hegemon is always parochial.
Well, yeah, exactly. But this is. If you're British or Canadian, part of your sort of self-identification is counterposing your country to the United States.
Well, particularly if you're Canadian, because you don't really have any other identity beyond that.
But also, I would say another thing is that because of like the creation of, let's say, the internet has created a unified media space, a kind of space that didn't exist before, right? You maybe got CNN International on like Sky TV in the UK, but you weren't like, there was no unified media space. The internet has created this undifferentiated media space, which means the cultural conflicts and cultural wars taking place in the United States are beginning to affect anywhere where English is widely spoken, right?
I would agree with that, particularly amongst the educated elite. But
no, not just amongst the educated elite. I have friends, working class people I know from my hometown in Hull, who are really into QAnon because they're in Facebook groups.
Oh, yeah.
They're in Facebook groups in which like these things spread. So like,
I'm more thinking about the non-English speaking world that still speaks English as a second language, like when I'm in the Middle East.
Right. I would agree. Like, like people who speak but I think people who speak English kind of get caught up in these like cultural debates to a certain degree.
We also get some British cultural debates here. I mean, that does happen. So
I mean, like the turf stuff, let's say,
right?
But generally, I think like we like, and it's not accidental as well. There's like deliberate attempts. I mean, we had Professor Gopal, Priya Gopal, on our show, and she made the claim. She said, "Look, there is money seeking to import American cultural war touchstones into the United Kingdom, right?"
Oh yeah,
they're like very clear efforts to do that type of politics in the United Kingdom, and I think that's also to a certain extent, true probably in Canada, to a.
Well, I would say that I would say the cultural difference between Canada and then the United States is, as a person, and I am actually speaking as a person who, as a child, had dual citizenship, so I'm not speaking out my ass, is overstated. There are sincere cultural differences between the two places, but like North American political attitudes are actually, Canada's more progressive than the United States, and it's nicer, but the attitudes are remarkably similar, even as opposed to Europe, on poll after poll after poll. But part of the Canadian identity is that it is not the United States.
True.
It is British North America that is not the US.
Yeah.
So like counterposing, I mean, like it leads to weird defenses of stuff like the Queen, and how could we ever have a progressive policy towards the indigenous people if there wasn't treaties with the crown? And I'm like, you could have a progressive policy towards the indigenous people by not being shitheads, I suppose.
And one of the major differences between Canada is the political balance of power. You have like, there's no confederacy. There's no form of confederacy in Canada, right?
No, but there is a Quebec.
There is Quebec, but they also have a Quebec, and they have like a Midwest, like Alberta, which is actually also
it's more like
the
a Texas,
interior,
which is very much like a Texas. But their political balance of power is that the liberal regions of the country are just more politically powerful than the conservative ones. Whereas, you have parts of the United States, which are probably just as liberal as Canada, that, were it left up to them, they would probably have, universal health care and things like that. But like the overall political balance of power in the United States is, far more shifted conservative. Plus you have an electoral system and a political system which skews the country even more conservative. So,
and kind of trying to tail this back into our really what we're talking about, which is kind of this left media sphere. I think a lot of people that I may not like their takes or not agree with their politics are trying to do good work, but they don't care about real issues because real issues don't get you to that level.
Right.
Like there's a UBI in California that no one really talks about. I haven't, maybe someone is, I haven't heard him talk about it. I was actually with someone recently that literally has to navigate through that system for her students that she counsels. She told me 20% of the students she deals with in a county that I would not think of as a poor county, a poor part of California at all, are homeless.
Yeah, I mean, California is.
But again, this is coming from the quote unquote nice part of California.
Right. But that makes
and
makes
for
sense
her to say that, for her to say that, and for her to say, she goes, you know how hard it is to get that UBI that they're giving out? She goes, I have kids living in like from cars to laundromats to, of course, couch surfing, and they don't qualify for that shit. Like that's something that I find interesting that we really should be talking about, because Andrew Yang made such a big national stir by bringing back up the term universal basic income. And it has been rolled out in a few places. Actually, the place that got rolled out in Stockton, no one's talking about that because it's not real clickable.
It's not real clickable. It's not fun. And the actual bureaucratic reality of it, because of the way we're federated in the United States, is also a fucking nightmare. So, like,
thank you.
I mean, like,
no, really, and
seriously,
and you have to understand how that works.
All right, and
you might
I
have to read a few articles.
I mean, one thing I will say about a lot of the left media spheres, a lot of people attracted are people who are downwardly mobile, who are recently educated. Maybe they're like me, they're part of the first generation of their family to be educated in their direct family line and are frustrated with what we were sold. Maybe they are not like that, but have only seen their incomes decline, although their parents have wealth and can support them. But they're not, and it's more the latter than the former, honestly, aren't usually aware of how this world works. Whereas, you know, I'm a teacher, I deal with this every day. I'm always trying to get like, I teach a ride district in the nice part of Salt Lake, and Salt Lake is one of the nicer metropolitan areas in the United States. And I probably have 10% of my kids are homeless. Now in California, that the contradictions, use good old Marxist term, are even higher, because basically the middle class is gone, and like increasingly in California, they're all moving to, I don't know, Salt Lake, Arizona,
Springfield,
Nevada, Reno,
Reno, Mexico. So, I mean, like basically getting pushed out, right? Like, and so the people who stay there are going to be the people who are too poor to even do that. But that's not immediately intuitive until you really start looking at the broader systemic problem. Because I'm like, oh yeah, there's got to be tons of poor people in California, because it's easy to be poor.
That's
like,
where the most homeless people, I believe, are in the country, is in California.
Because it's so expensive to live there. You could become poor very quickly.
Very quick.
So, I mean, but none of this, like talking about stuff like even like regional differences in cost of living, like makes people's eyes glaze over and they start accusing you of being Vox. And so like,
it's just a lot simpler and easier to produce content. So let's say you have like trend leaders in left media, and then you have a whole ecosystem built up on commenting on those trend leaders, right? Commenting about the takes offered by those trend, like the people who are
talk soup model.
Yeah, talk soup. So it becomes, there used to be this guy, I don't know if he's still around.
No non-Gen Xers are going to understand that reference, Jason.
Called Progressive Voice, right? This guy called Progressive Voice. And he was literally a guy, and I don't know if he still does it, but it was when Michael Brooks was alive. And it would be like, he would do like, Michael Brooks said this, and this person said that. And it's like literally commenting on the comments of commentators, right? So it's like very removed. But that is obviously when people are consuming the left media as a form of entertainment, that becomes kind of like you said, I don't know, like TMZ
This is a trend actually in American culture that I think people should look at. Actually, in world culture, I'm actually being too nice and limiting it to America. That people should look at that is bigger than politics. So I used to run a literary magazine that would publish new, fresh literature, even with some kind of big names. And then I'd publish interviews and commentaries on that literature. Also kind of big names, like we interviewed Jonathan Lethem and people who were big at the time. And I had a conversation with Jeff Vandermeer, et cetera, et cetera. Here's what I noticed. People never read the literature. They read the commentary on the literature. They never read the literature. They read the commentary on the literature. The click difference, even before you started getting into Facebook playing with algorithms and you paying for play, which started around the time that I really backed off of this, the click difference was like an order of 100 to 1.
Jesus.
The difference between commentary and the actual primary thing that we were commenting about. I've met kids now who listen to horror movie podcasts who've never seen the movies being discussed in the podcast, but have strong opinions about said movies because of the parasocial relationship they've had. Now, so this leads me to ask ourselves, if we want to fight this, we actually do have to look, and I've said this about the culture wars in general, not at whether or not this is good or bad, because it's bad, but that's neither here nor there. Like me saying it's bad isn't going to change a damn thing. You're going to have a parasocial relationship. If you already believe it's bad, you're going to agree with me. If you think it's good, you're going to scream at me. Like, I'm not that interested in that. I want to figure out why it's happening. What in our economic and media sphere has encouraged this kind of engagement, because it's not limited to politics. One, I do think Djene is dead on is national politics in the U.S. has become a worldwide media phenomenon. I mean, it's weird. Like, I would be talking to cabbies in Egypt who barely spoke English, and they would ask my opinion on Trump and Hillary, like in 2015.
But can I give you my Peter, my what really grinds my gears, everyman answer to your very, very difficult question, and hopefully Djene will have a more British response with bigger words and more context.
At least a good accent.
Great accent. Why do you think he's here? He's got like 5 accents at once. He's part Welsh, Kurdish, and he's from the mythical land of Irakistan. My take is, and I was having this conversation with a friend, I won't name him, because you have now back to what I said earlier, people that they are the offspring of our generation, where we literally grew up with brand loyalty, and the proliferation of like more drive-ins and fast food. And, we're also the kids that grew up with TV dinners. Like, you could show a TV dinner to our generation right now, we'll tell you the brownie. we loved the brownie. And Twitter being so huge with their 128 or 140 characters, whatever, now it's like 280. The algorithm that now says, we want more video essays that are no longer than like 25 minutes if you really want to get played. And the internet giving you a world now where you no longer have to watch news you don't like. You don't have to watch shows you don't like. You don't have to watch commercials. Even my 3-year-old doesn't like commercials if he watches television and not Netflix or my YouTube that I have for the show, or there's no commercials playing. He just doesn't get them. I want what I want it, when I want it, how I want it now becomes the mindset of a generation. So when you take politics on that and you have something like Force the Vote literally is made for that mindset. Now, I don't think Jimmy Dore is a mastermind of psychology that sat down in a room and figured all this shit out. I think he just got lucky, and there was a moment and that shit blew up. He was already a thing at the time, so it's not like it blew him up, but it's the epitome of I want what I want, when I want it, how I want it, now. That's just what really grinds my gears take.
Well, we have been going for 1 hour and 20 minutes. So any last words, guys? Anything you want to take away? We need to take away. Varn?
Yeah, I am going to end on a quote by Pat Buchanan, of all people, that I think is actually somewhat prescient. When a political movement fails to take power, it starts as politics, matures into a business, and dies as a general grift. Now, I added general there because I do not think that what he's describing is the occurrence of a bunch of grifters. I think it is a trend that you are trying to maintain some kind of audience for things that you think are important and that you care about. And the only way you can do that is an opportunistic feeding them what you think they already want to know. If you're successful, you don't do that. Even as a business, much less as a political movement. And so in so much that if we ever become successful again, a lot of this stuff will go away. We didn't have it for all the flaws of the Bernie campaign, and I could go on for days about that. we didn't really have it during the Bernie campaign, because at least we had something for the first time in 30 years that didn't taste like utter and complete defeat, which we got drunk on and we're stupid, but still, like, you know, it felt good to not be, well, I'm the total weirdo loser. And so I get where that comes from. And that's just what I want people to think about. Don't hate the player so much as look at what the game is.
Jason,
so that's my point.
Any final comments?
I think Derek kind of hits the nail on the head. Definitely, I hope people read the piece and, you know, send me your opinion, good or bad. I can take it. Trust me. I'm fine.
Jason, you're stopping the revolution.
I definitely will stop a revolution. I will say this. I was on a show, won't say what show.
Oh, the deep state got him. The deep state got him. It looks like the deep state got him.
He was on a show and then he wasn't anymore.
Damn it.
His own show. All right.
The deep state got you.
Deep state was like, don't do it.
Be careful.
I just remember the hate that I got on live time because we were guests, so I can't take the chat off the screen. So we're seeing live time. And Pascal, for whatever reason, wasn't watching. Maybe he had another thing open, so he didn't see it. And then after he saw it, he was like, wow, those people really didn't like us. But I found it interesting that when I thought that their very kind of foolish plan didn't make sense and would get people hurt, I was getting yelled at. Well, and it was like, well, what do you want us to do? What is your plan? And that's another reason why I wrote this piece, because it frightened me, because I was like, wow, I'm talking to people right now that feel so defeated that they'll hop on anything that sounds like something. Mm-hmm. And that's frightening, because that's when fascism just creeps in real easy.
Action. Anything, any kind of action.
Any kind of action. I want direct action. And that definitely was another reason why I had to write the piece. And Djene was an editing force in the piece to, you know, keep me in line and definitely help me with grammar. Because I did want to stay on task and really explain to people that I don't think everyone involved in this universe is trying to fool you. And I don't want people to think that this left universe is that financially advantageous. If everyone on this screen right now made a rightward shift, we would make real money.
I mean, it would have to be a particular kind of rightward shift, but yes, there'd be
like shitting on the left-right shift. Oh, fuck yeah.
Yeah, that would make a lot of money.
You know, the Blaze would be full of color to say shit. Oh,
I just,
jerk that right now.
Look, the golden age of being someone of Middle East origin, slagging off Islam is over, but definitely there's still a market for being the black person who says the left is evil.
Yeah.
This has been beautiful, but as they say, all good things must come to an end. Varn, Jason, thank you very much. And we are out.